The Crady deal falls through, the long-distance strategizing fails, and Tiger Lil gains her revenge. She claims ownership of a house that was never meant for her, a house she does not want, by paying 50 grand in liens late in 1955. Ooh, that had to sting. That had to sting because, I mean, he technically was building that house when he was still with her, but he never really wanted Lili in that house with him at all. In all the houses that they had lived in together up to that point, all they did was fight like literal cats and dogs. I mean, literal cats and dogs. She once took a fully unopened full bottle of champagne and broke it over his head at a party that he arrived late for, an anniversary party. And she was so ticked off, and she did it in front of probably 30 or 40 people. So she was a little cray. I mean, I'm not saying that, he didn't deserve a lot of what he got, but yeah, like she was particularly vengeful, that one. Well, hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer. I am so happy to have you here for episode 9 of Errol Flynn Slept Here. And today we're going to get into the chapter called Tiger Lil's Revenge. Now, if you haven't listened to the last episode, episode 8, we were reading chapter 6, In Like Flynn. Errol Flynn had emerged not guilty from his rape trial of 1943. But like he said, it's not like you beat the rap of a rape trial, you endured it. And he really found that his reputation, everything that he had enjoyed, his name, so to speak, before the trial, after the trial, he basically had to start from scratch, and in my humble opinion, never came back from the depths in which he found himself. And what was particularly shameful for him was the phrase "in like Flynn," which basically meant that you had it with the ladies, and you were, all you had to do was just slide on in there and she was yours for the taking. That phrase entered the American idiom, and it was quite shameful and it was disgraceful for him. And after that, he really felt that he was just this phallic symbol and that he was a joke. And based on that, he just let himself go emotionally and physically. Hard drinking, hard partying, he never let up, died at the age of 50 in 1959. By all accounts, the autopsy said, with a body of an 80-year-old. So yeah, we are starting that deep descent, you guys. So if you haven't watched that episode, it is really, really good because it really explores just the depths of misery that Errol found himself in after that rape trial. And it actually is really sad and it's really a tragedy. So I will link that episode somewhere up here or linked in the Errol Flynn Slept Here playlist below in the description. And I've got my handy dandy Kindle right here. I would have loved to have had the book itself, but it's out of print and it was almost $90 when I was looking to buy it before I started the series on Amazon. So I just went ahead and got the Kindle version. But yeah, still has all the pictures, still has everything. And also, Tiger Lil is the nickname that Errol Flynn gave to his first wife, the French actress Lili Damita, that he was married to for 7 years. And he said he was married to her for 7 years and regretted it for the rest of his life. This woman made it her life's mission to milk every single dime she could out of Errol. He even had to flee the country to get away from this woman. He went to Europe, but we'll find out about all this in chapter 7, Tiger Lil's Revenge. So let's get going. After World War II, television hits Hollywood with the power of a magnitude 8 earthquake. It was no longer the Hollywood I knew, Olivia de Havilland will later remember. Humphrey Bogart grumbles, quote, "No one in Hollywood knows how to have fun anymore except me and Errol Flynn," end quote. Moguls face the prospect of massive changes to the way they do business as the habits of the American public change and fewer people venture to movie theaters, favoring instead the comforts of home as they tune in to black and white TV sets. The last thing a studio boss like Jack Warner needs to worry about is a contract player gone bad. Early in 1945, the idea for Flynn to portray Don Juan had gained some traction at the studio. It is another of those bigger-than-life characters that only Flynn could play, like Peter Blood or Robin of Locksley, and given his life and loves, the role holds the potential to top even these. And as we discussed in the last episode, there were talks to put Errol in the Don Juan character. I believe, if I get the year wrong, I'll correct it, but I believe it was like 1945-ish. But because of stuff going on at the studio, at Warner Brothers and the different studios with the strikes and stuff that were going on at the time, they had to shelve the project for 2 years. And in the interim, because Errol did such hard living, he looked so much older and he was aging rapidly. So when he finally took on the role, I believe in 1947 of Don Juan, he was looking a lot older and he just was not able to show up and perform and deliver as an actor as he was earlier in his career. He was just descending further and further down into that dark hole of just drinking and depression and feeling, bad about everything that had happened in his life up to that point. It was like that roller coaster to just the great abyss. So yeah, it was really sad. Flynn eagerly devours the first draft screenplay and hates it. He sits with producer Jerry Wald and director Raoul Walsh and discusses changes. But that same month, March 1945, Hollywood set directors go on a strike that will last 7 months, culminating in the Black Friday riot at Warner's front gate. Flynn goes on to other productions. Don Juan moves to the back burner. So we'll get into that because when he comes back to get the role and work the role, he's just a lot older. He's a lot older acting and looking. After scoring a controversial hit with Objective Burma, Flynn makes 4 more vehicles that take him to summer 1947. He enters the production of Silver River a drunk and, by some accounts, a drug addict. J.L. Warner, that's the head of Warner Brothers Studio, sends a memo to Flynn's agent, Lou Wasserman, and the memo reads, "If Flynn is late, if liquor is being used so that from the middle of the afternoon on it is impossible for the director to make any more scenes with Flynn, we must hold Flynn legally and financially responsible. We will never again make pictures where Flynn or any other artist becomes incoherent due to liquor or whatever it may be." End quote. So, it was a real problem back then with quite a few of their contract players, including Errol, that were under contract to these studios. Usually these contracts lasted for about 7 years or so, and you were held by and bound by that contract. You had to show up and you had to do the roles that you were given. And because so many actors and actresses of the day found that system so oppressive, and particularly Errol, because as we all know, he's that Tasmanian devil, right? So he really, really hated that system, and he would rebel by showing up drunk, getting drunk on set, all that kind of stuff. And some of the stuff I was reading was saying basically that a lot of directors knew that by 2 p.m., they were done. They had hopefully gotten all the scenes of the day that they could with Errol because he was pretty much just incoherent by that time of day. Around this time, Flynn calls Raoul Walsh to Mulholland and asks for help. Mulholland is his home. According to Walsh, physical exams show that Flynn's health is shot, and he asks for Walsh's advice, which is simple: clean up your act. So Flynn takes the pledge, and Silver River commences production. His co-star is Ann Sheridan, another hard drinker and apparently a bad influence. Studio executives devise a plan to keep Flynn away from Sheridan for the first 3.5 weeks of production to get in as much in the can as possible. See what I mean? Shooting for so long without the leading lady means jumping periods from one point in the story timeline to another, which Flynn hates to do. Despite his grumbling, the production starts strong. Screenwriter Stephen Longstreet says, "Raoul Walsh, who was directing Silver River, came to me and said, 'Kid, write it fast. They're not drinking. They promised Jack Warner that, but you never know.'" Cut to 6 weeks later, after 3 weeks of togetherness for drinking buddies Flynn and Sheridan. On June 5th, 1947, J.L. Warner sends a telegram from the Burbank studios to Flynn on location. Listen to this. This is crazy. Okay, it's written like in all caps the way that they did, like when you look at in movies and stuff, those old telegrams, all caps, right? It says, "Dear Errol, if things I hear are true, I am surprised. The dailies don't look good. There's no spirit in your work. You are doing things you said you never would do while working on a picture. This isn't fair to yourself, the pick, or your future, and the people you are working with." That was the telegram. Longstreet finds Walsh tearing pages out of the script. I asked why, and he said, removing the chicken shit, the dialogue, too much yak yak. Longstreet says, I knew then the picture was in trouble. Silver River will set studio records for cost overruns and days behind schedule, which, according to Longstreet, forces the studio heads to declare Silver River finished. It is the only major studio film I know of for which there is no ending. The picture ended in mid-air. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. I'm going to prop my Kindle up a little bit here. Just then, Damita subpoenas Flynn to appear in court on July 29, 1947, to explain why he has missed making alimony and child support payments. She wants records of Warner Brothers and Thompson Productions, Social Security taxes withheld, and the existing Warner Brothers contract. Flynn remains a bankable commodity for the studio, despite the odds scrape with the law and paternity suit, despite chronic drinking. At a time when Warner's is divesting itself of aging stars, Flynn is given a gargantuan new contract covering 15 pictures in the next 14 years to take effect on January 1st, 1948. Let's see, 14 years into the future from January 1st, 1948 would be past 1959, and Errol died in 1959. So this contract never came to be. The first 3 pictures will pay him $200,000 each, and he will be free to work outside the studio for 1 picture a year. This new rich contract should take care of Errol's money problems and his satellite wives and offspring, but Flynn simply can't clean himself up, personally or financially. So yes, at that point he had 2 ex-wives, Lili Damita and Nora Eddington. Nora Eddington was the woman that he met when she was 18 years old, fresh-faced, working the cigarette counter in the lobby of the courthouse that he had to go to every day because he was on trial for statutory rape. So he's, got his eye on a cute little redhead, romancing her, and he ends up marrying her and having 2 children with her, 2 daughters. So at that point, he's got 2 ex-wives. And there's a picture in the chapter, and it shows Lili Damita and Errol in court. I always say her name like that, Lili Damita. Her back purposely turned toward the dream team, a confident Tiger Lil awaits the beginning of a legal proceeding to nail Errol Flynn for delinquent alimony and child support payments. Attorneys Jerry Gessler and Robert Ford stand between Damita and a haggard Flynn. Now, Jerry Gessler was the famed attorney that got Errol off of those statutory rape counts back in his trial in 1943. And there's also a picture of Errol, and you can see he is aging. He's aging rapidly, and it's saying, hoping for a career revival at MGM, Flynn poses formally in the living room for a movie magazine in 1950. And then there's another picture of him saying, Flynn got along well with young Vivica Lindfors as they posed together early in the production of Don Juan. And then it's also showing Errol here sitting on a director's chair. And it says, after a long, hard 7 months, Flynn and Alan Hale share a relaxed moment on the soundstage. And this was when he was filming Don Juan. So regarding this 14-year contract, and where he was supposed to make 15 pictures, and the contract was to take effect on January 1st, 1948. Regarding this contract, it says that it's blessed by J.L. Warner, who has deluded himself into believing in a Flynn renaissance that will commence with the long, mothballed Don Juan. Director Gene Negolcio has been recrafting the script to take into account the changing public taste in pictures. Don Juan will not be a homewrecker or unnecessarily quarrelsome, but rather what gets him involved in love affairs and duels is his physical attraction, his legend, which knocks the pretty girls for a loop, even when he's not trying to court them. Making Silver River had damaged the Flynn-Walsh relationship to the extent that neither man wants to repeat the experience with Don Juan. Nor does Flynn feel confident in the abilities of the new director, but Flynn's drinking buddy Ann Sheraton speaks highly of Vincent Sherman, who has directed 2 of her pictures. He's easygoing, he can put up with some booze on the set. Flynn requests that Sherman, who describes himself as, quote, one worried Jewish boy, end quote, on hearing the news, be assigned to Don Juan. So he's trying to get Vincent Sherman to direct him in Don Juan. Sherman remembers, "For the first 3 or 4 weeks, we just got along beautifully. He was on time, he knew his lines, he took direction beautifully and even improved on it." On November 7th, 1947, the offbeat Flynn drama Escape Me Never premieres in New York to critical pans that take aim at Flynn. Sherman claims that this event causes Flynn to fall off the wagon and sends the production of Don Juan to hell. And in that movie, Escape Me Never, he is starring with Ida Lupito, and we talk about her in episode 8. And she was someone that Errol really, really loved. Many say that she was the woman that he would have really married and made her, quote, the Baroness of Mulholland Farm, had he not wanted to protect her from him. It was almost like he knew that if he were to get, really serious with Ida, that it was going to be doomsday for her, because he couldn't be married. He couldn't be faithful. He knew he would always screw up his relationships. And he even said this himself, that, he loved her too much to do that to her. So that was who he starred with in that movie, Escape Me Never. So it says, "The Adventures of Don Juan production file tells a different story. Don Juan starts to lag, not because of Flynn, but because of Vincent Sherman's ponderous pace as a director. The production manager grouses time and again that Sherman is dragging his feet. It doesn't help that Alan Hale, playing Don Juan's sidekick, is ill for the first 3 weeks of production, but they shoot around him, and Flynn remains a model citizen. It doesn't help that Vivica Lindfors, the female lead, is on another picture for 3 weeks, then arrives at the studio, and from the first instant becomes not merely a queen, but more accurately, a queen bitch. Flynn, to his credit, jumps periods gracefully." Not 3 weeks, but 3 months into production, Sherman finds himself 22 days behind schedule, and Flynn suffers an attack of hemorrhoids, which may or may not really be hemorrhoids, but which are a pain in the ass for Jack Warner and the other studio executives. Everything has been going so well with Flynn. The studio has been pushing forward with efforts to publicize the picture, making sure the photographers are around when Flynn's 3 kids visit the set: 7-year-old Sean, 3-year-old Deirdre, and baby Rory. Now, Sean, 7-year-old Sean, was the child that he had, the son he had with Lili Damita, the first wife, and 3-year-old Deirdre and baby Rory are who he had with his second wife, Nora Eddington. And he's divorced from both of them by that point. Why the wheels come off, they don't know, but suddenly Flynn is hitting the bottle hard and back on the drugs as well. It was an experience to work with Errol Flynn, in spite of the fact that he was drinking heavily, co-star Vivica Lindfors will later write, conveniently forgetting her own part in the saga. She says after 3 p.m. he was out, and all the close-ups of the rest of us, the other actors, had to be saved until then. Saturdays were a total loss. Maureen O'Hara would share a similar experience a few years later on another swashbuckler, Against All Flags. While lauding his professionalism, she noted one glaring inconsistency. Errol also drank on the set, something I greatly disliked. You couldn't stop him. Errol did whatever he liked. So that's Maureen O'Hara saying that, the actress. Flynn's drinking weighs down production for the prime years of his career and becomes a key factor in the production of Don Juan as it lumbers on for 7 months. At one point, even Vince Sherman breaks down, and who should come in to pitch hit but Raoul Walsh? When shooting finally mercifully ends, Errol and Nora head to Zaka for a cruise that is to be covered by Hollywood features writer Sarah Hamilton. Oh, excuse me. So I guess Errol and Nora weren't divorced at that time, but relatively soon after. The trip soon turns into a running Flynn versus Flynn battle of such horrific proportions that Hamilton can find no angle for a story. See what I mean? Headed for divorce. The Investment by Photoplay magazine is returned only in an uninteresting December 1948 2-page photo travelogue with captions, and no one looks happy. As Warner Brothers' big Christmas release of 1948, Don Juan receives excellent reviews, but the studio's marketing campaign is disjointed and the box office just adequate. The handwriting is on the wall for budgets on Flynn's upcoming pictures. A few weeks later, Nora leaves him for singer and actor Dick Hames, ending the 6-year relationship. Suddenly, his financial obligations to ex-wives swell to $6,000 per month. But Flynn's new contract offers him a means of escape. Far off to the southwest from Mulholland sits the sprawling MGM lot, home of the biggest stars and the grandest productions. Clark Gable has spent a career there and become king of the movies. Flynn exercises his contract option to make an outside film a year and makes the drive to MGM to begin That Forsyte Woman just in time for the studio's gala 25th anniversary. Flynn can be seen at official functions with the MGM All-Star team and sitting in the official anniversary portrait. He looks as uncomfortable as he does out of place, but the intimidating setting pulls from him his first sober and focused performance in years. After that, it's back to Warner's to a be programmer of a Western and back to the bottle. And I found some footage on YouTube of the MGM 25th anniversary star-studded luncheon that the studio hosted, and they had all the biggest stars of the day. Anyone and everyone you could think of, from Frank Sinatra to Judy Garland. And there's a part, and I'll see if I could pull the video and put it in the video for you guys, but there's a part in the video where there is a man on stage interviewing all the stars as they're coming out to enter into the luncheon. And you can see a man kind of walking back and forth kind of awkwardly, like he doesn't know if he's supposed to come out and be introduced or what. So they're introducing star after star. And then you see this guy, and I'm watching it thinking, like, when are they going to show Errol? Who is this guy? And you see him coming up. And it's Errol, and he talks to the guy on the microphone is like, haha, but the guy never even introduces Errol. Errol's just kind of like shuffled to the side. And then, he continues bringing up the stars, as they're walking forward and naming them. And you've got all these great stars, Ava Gardner, all these people. And I'm thinking, why didn't the guy announce Errol? It seemed like he was an afterthought or something. It was really weird. So, I mean, no doubt he felt weird and uncomfortable and out of place because MGM wasn't his permanent home the way that Warner's was. And yeah, he was exercising that one picture a year outside of Warner's option.
Mr. Clark Gable. Miss Ava Gardner. Miss Judy Garland. Mr. Fred Astaire. Miss Betty Garrett. Hi, sweetie. Miss Greer Garson. Miss Greer Garson, ladies and gentlemen. To the right. Miss Catherine Grayson. And Miss Catherine Grayson. Hello. Hi, Tom. Glad to see you. Miss Catherine Hepburn. And Miss Catherine Grayson. Hello. Hi, Tom. Glad to see you. Miss Catherine Hepburn.
So I'm sure that was quite a bruise to Errol's ego to go and to be treated like that. And just watching the footage, I thought that was kind of unbelievably rude to have him just kind of pace back and forth, not really know if he's going to be announced. He walks up and then the guy doesn't even say, here's Errol Flynn. Like, it was just really weird. I mean, it's not like no one knew who the guy was. Of course, they knew who he was. He was one of the biggest action stars, albeit for a different studio. So I just thought that whole video was just very, very strange. And when you look at footage of him sitting there eating at the luncheon, he doesn't look very happy at all. He actually looks... He looks a little ticked off, and I believe he's sitting next to Greer Garson, the actress. I'll see if I can find out who he was sitting next to, and if it's wrong, I'll put the name there. But yeah, so I just wanted to insert that little tidbit. After that, it's back to Warner's, to a B programmer of a Western, and back to the bottle. Nothing keeps him sober for long, although he recognizes that his time with MGM had answered a need to prove himself as a performer and as a man. He asks for another loan out to MGM and has 2 films from which to choose: the H. Rider Haggard story, King Solomon's Mines, and Rudyard Kipling's tale of the British Empire, Kim. In retrospect, Flynn chooses unwisely, as he often does, when he decides upon the lazily paced, child's point of view, Kim. Flynn leaves Mulholland for a circuitous journey to India for location work, stops off in Paris, and there meets a girl he calls a dream with the biggest pair of dark eyes I ever saw. So begins another inappropriate relationship, this time with an 18-year-old, a violet-eyed aristocrat of the Ginka dynasty, one-time rulers of Wallachia and Moldavia. Accent on the one time, because now the Ginkas in general and Princess Irene Ginka in particular are out of power and broke. So I guess this new paramour of Errol's, this 18-year-old aristocrat, she's got a good pedigree, but apparently her family is broke. And in the book, there's 2 pictures of Errol sitting at his desk, and it says, just back from India and the production of Kim, Flynn lounges in his bathrobe and writes at the desk in his den at Christmas 1943. Still, Irene is born and bred as royalty and cool to his advances, and Flynn likes nothing so much as the thrill of the chase, no matter how long it takes. He courts her through his time in India, conquers her, and brings her back to Mulholland. Marge Eddington comments, they are very well suited to each other. The romance makes all the papers, and a marriage is much discussed. Princess Irene Ginka is set to become Mrs. Errol Flynn, number 3. And when they say that Marge Eddington comments that they were well suited, Marge Eddington is the stepmother of Errol's second wife, Nora. So she works with him kind of like as his secretary / kind of like just runs his household for him. So that's who that was. Flynn is home and some of his demons are gone. He's fit, he's got 2 MGM A pictures to his credit, and a princess in the downstairs master bedroom. He hosts a succession of lavish and successful parties at the end of 1949 and the first half of 1950. Hedy Lamarr, who has just completed her Siren's turn in Samson and Delilah at MGM, where Flynn is working, attends one of the Mulholland parties given for the Metro crowd. On a career high, Lamarr says, I found my next script indirectly because of a visit to Errol Flynn's house. That script was Lady Without a Passport, which producer Jack Cummings offers to her down at the casino that evening. The casino was a building that Errol had on his property where they would do gambling and have cockfights. It was kind of crazy going on. Errol just loved to do all kinds of illegal things. Wasn't it great? Despite Flynn's success on film and in society, he's restless, always restless. He heads off to Gallup, New Mexico to begin a new Western, Rocky Mountain, and falls in lust with a new co-star, new Warner Brothers ingenue, Patrice Wymore. Within days, Flynn sends Irene packing and begins his pursuit of the tall, nearsighted, and quiet 23-year-old from Kansas. Flynn, the leg and ass man, will say later, she's got a fabulous pair of lean, sexy, gangly legs that puts her in the deluxe class. Yeah, he was notoriously a leg man. He really loved legs for some reason. All the while, through his marriage to Nora and his courtships with Irene and Patrice, he lives the high life and draws advances on his salaries. He throws lavish Mulholland parties, pays for the 120-foot Zaka moored at Newport, buys property in his new love Jamaica, and travels, always eating at the finest restaurants and staying in 5-star hotels. He has a sense of his debts and credits, but leaves the details to his business manager, Al Blum. He is passive-aggressive about paying support to Lili for Sean and to Nora for Deidre and Rory. And now in Nice, France, where Flynn makes the minor film Adventures of Captain Fabian as his 1951 loan out, he stages a media circus marriage to Patrice Wymore, who returns to the U.S. to become the new mistress of Mulholland Farm. Now we are on to wife number 3, Patrice. I really want to run the house like an efficient wife, she declares, and out goes Marge Eddington despite her successful turn as manager of Mulholland for more than 3 years. Pat finds it simply too strange having an Eddington and a Wymore under the same roof. Well, that was probably really intuitive and smart on Patrice's part, that's for sure. Living at Mulholland with his bride, Flynn is fit and focused. His 1952 loan out is to Universal International for The Swashbuckler Against All Flags with Maureen O'Hara. Then he begins what will be his last film at the Burbank Studios as a Warner Brothers contract player, the treasure hunt melodrama Maru Maru, co-starring the latest studio hottie, Ruth Roman. On January 18th, 1952, the Flynns are at Mulholland when a winter storm hits. 3 inches of rain fall in a day, causing flash floods that kill 8 around Los Angeles. Water rages down from the mountaintop above the farm, washing through the property. On February 7th, Flynn sends a letter to his business manager, Al Blum, assessing the damage. The heater, the water pump, and the filter for the pool are shot to hell, as is the heater in the furnace room. Says Flynn of immediate repairs to the heater, I saved some dough on this job by having it done by a couple of studio boys on their off hours and got the whole thing fixed for $185 plus 4 jugs of bourbon. In other damage, the brick wall outside his den is destroyed. The awnings to the upstairs bedrooms also destroyed, awnings to the tennis court shredded, and part of the roof peeled away. And the next picture in the chapter is a picture of this 19-year-old Princess Irene, and it says, flying first class on an airliner, Errol Flynn and his 19-year-old princess are caught in a tense and unhappy, candid moment. Irene's reign as Baroness of Mulholland will be short-lived. And she's quite a beautiful woman. I love looking at air travel pictures from 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even the 60s. They had so much room, so much room. Like, literally, if you look at that picture and you didn't necessarily know that they were on an airplane, you would be like, oh, they're sitting in a living room or something. They just look like they had so much room. But yeah, she was quite a beautiful girl. Okay, so the chapter continues. Flynn says that damage in the wine cellar is worst of all as far as I'm concerned, where all the film is stored. Thank God nearly all of it was stacked in racks and therefore above the water which came in. But 2 prints which had been just recently returned and left on the floor to be filled with the others. After immersion, they were like jelly and so scratched up as to be useless. It's not the actual monetary loss, which in the case of the black and white print is about $480, and the other one in color, $750, but the fact that I doubt if Warner's will ever agree to let me buy another print. So Errol famously kept a lot of film reels of a lot of his pictures. And that's what he's referring to down there of some of those films that got destroyed. Flynn has collected his own films all his career, nagging his employers to sell him 16mm prints and ultimately working it into his contract. The enigma emerges. The man who would stage slowdowns, inconvenience an entire cast and crew, make unreasonable demands, play sick, start drinking at noon, stumble or sleepwalk through his roles, and would proudly own prints of his titles, run them for family and friends, and loan them out to avid film collectors like Clark Gable and Lou Costello. At Mulholland, during the production of Myra Maru, Flynn pens a long, melancholy letter to Nora in which he describes a visit by a Texas businessman interested in buying the farm. Flynn says he has felt for some time that perhaps a change of environ might be the best. He gives the Texan a tour of the house, and they end up chatting by the bar. Here Flynn says that his mind had wandered back to a vision of a young Nora coming to him through the living room, dressed all in black, some episode from their earlier, happier times together. He admits to his ex-wife that maybe he's writing her a love letter and says that the memory of Nora in the house inspired him to turn the Texan down. I allowed as how I'd just hang on a whiles to the little old joint because I couldn't think right off where else to live. So that is that's quite rich. So he's got a brand new wife in the house and he's writing a love letter to the ex, but who by all accounts he treated her pretty shabbily while he was married to her. I mean, he waited for a really long time, months after him and Nora got married, before he would even publicly admit that he was married. It's crazy. Flynn completes Myra Maru at Warner's Burbank, then packs up with Pat and leaves Mulholland for Scotland, and then Italy, where he will make a new Warner Brothers swashbuckler, The Master of Ballantrae. On December 9th, 1952, he writes to Nora from Naples, astonished and frustrated to learn that Deirdre and Rory had been staying at Mulholland Farm for 2 weeks in his absence. He chastises Nora, saying that civility should have prompted you to acquaint me with the fact. Why necessarily would he be so mad that his daughters were staying at his house while he was gone? Maybe because he was mad that he wasn't there in order to spend time with his daughters. I don't know. It doesn't say. Flynn will jump from Ballantrae to another adventure film, Crossed Swords, shot in Italy, and then stay in the country for his next project. By then, he is far behind in alimony and child support payments and can't return to the States for fear of his creditors. So the stay by his daughters at Mulholland will be the last habitation by any of the Flynns at the place they all love. So this is now, okay, so this is December 52 that he's writing to Nora, ticked off that the kids are there without him knowing about it or being there. And yeah, that's it. So he dies in 59, October 59. So for the last 6 years of his life, he was not at his beloved Mulholland farm. Errol, with or without Patrice, the third wife, will embark on a 4-year period adrift, lodging on Zaka, that's his yacht, and in hotels in Europe and on newly bought property in Jamaica, living paycheck to paycheck. He invests much of his remaining wealth in his own brainchild, an ambitious independent feature called William Tell, to be shot in the Italian Alps. He hires respected director of photography Jack Cardiff to direct. He builds sets and selects a cast that includes his drinking pal, Bruce Cabot. He shoots the film in CinemaScope, but when his backers withdraw and Flynn runs out of money, no new funding sources emerge. Creditors appear on the scene, and Flynn drifts across Europe, begging anyone who will listen for funding to complete his film. Just as Pat gives birth to Errol's fourth child, daughter Arnelia, Bruce Cabot files a claim against Flynn for back wages on William Tell. The clothing and personal belongings of Errol and Patrice are seized, along with Flynn's 2 cars. "I couldn't believe Cabot would do a thing like this to me," said Flynn. "No real man strikes at another through his helpless family, especially after he's been befriended for 20 years. And in his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, Errol does talk about how betrayed he felt when his so-called pal, Bruce Cabot, sued him for back wages on that project that Errol had masterminded and was funding, himself. By all accounts, it was all coming from Errol. So, I don't know, particularly a low blow. I mean, Errol had a lot of really disgraceful behavior in his life, but I definitely don't see him as someone who would backstab a friend. So I'm sure that was particularly biting for him. It says, back in America, another man does worse. Flynn's business manager, Al Blum, drops dead, and records reveal that he has embezzled tens of thousands of dollars of Flynn money. Flynn is now desperate for cash and believes he will never again live in the United States. His new business manager, attorney Justin Judd Goldenbach, places the following small boxed classified ad in the Hollywood Reporter. And I'll put it up here so you guys can see it. It says, "Hear ye, Errol Flynn offers his famous Mulholland Farms for rent or lease, completely furnished. It's a little hard to read. Projection room, theater room, caretaker, pool, tennis court, pony ring with pony. $19.50 per month by appointment, please." And then I guess it's got the phone number and the realtor. So $1,950 a month. Can you imagine how embarrassed Errol must have been to put a notice in the paper, in the Hollywood Reporter, no less, right? Like the Bible that everyone in Hollywood is reading, that he's putting up Mulholland Farm for lease. Crazy. Nora is pressing Flynn for child support. Lili turns up the heat, demanding delinquent payments. Other creditors appear, including a Hollywood publicity firm that files a claim going back to 1950, when Flynn had been trying to get buzz going for his Republic production, eventually retitled Adventures of Captain Fabian, then filming in France. The suit against Errol Flynn and producer William Marshall claims that Flynn had agreed to pay $400 a week for publicity, but he never sent a check. In September 55, Mulholland Farm is advertised at sheriff's sale. That means it went into foreclosure. Flynn writes to Goldenbach, quote, "My main concern is the situation at Mulholland House, and I would like to have your ideas on this and what has been done with this situation. Obviously, the house is up for sale, and something must be done very quickly to save it or retrieve something from the ruins." How very sad. How very sad. There's a picture of Errol in here, and it says, "During production of Universal's Against All Flags in 1952, Flynn broke his leg while performing a stunt. It is one of many instances where he took chances physically, and over the course of time, his body was wrecked. Physical pain would be one reason he relied on vodka and morphine later in life." He notoriously had really bad back problems as well. But can you see in that picture how he's already starting to look very bloated in the face? And that's, less than a decade, 9 years after the rape trial. So he's aging rapidly and just living such a hard life. I mean, no wonder, you know what I mean? On October 9th, a municipal court judge awards Mulholland Farm to Robert McLean and George H. Thomas Jr. for their $1,988.62 claim against Errol Flynn and William Marshall. Golden Bach, that's his new attorney that's handling all his financials, on behalf of Flynn, scrambles to remove the artwork from Mulholland, pay the debt, and redeem the property. He approaches an interested party in San Diego, a man named Crady, about the purchase of Mulholland Farm. Lili is closing in and backs Flynn further into a corner. At the end of October, he floats an idea past Judge Goldenbach that they offer Lili 15% of Flynn's income for the next 15 years. In a letter to the attorney, Flynn makes a reasoned case for Goldenbach to present to Damita. Naturally, and it says, quote, "Naturally, if Lili is going to keep the dogs out after me, then she makes it quite impossible for me to return to California. This does neither any of us good. By effectively preventing me from returning to California under threats of contempt of court and imprisonment, she is hurting herself because naturally my value as an artist must automatically diminish. So what I propose is something like this. If Lili will agree to call off the dogs, then I will agree to some such deal that would guarantee her for the next 5 years 15% of my earnings, common sense of which she must have some, especially in financial matters, should tell her that this is the best deal she could possibly get. Certainly a lot better than she has been making out in the past 5 years and will in the next 5 if things continue as they are," end quote. So that's Errol's little bargaining chip to, throw out to Lili. He adds in his own hand to the typed letter, quote, "Of course, the deal means a complete sign-off of all claims past or future by Tiger Lil," end quote. I love how he didn't call her by her name. He calls her Tiger Lil in his own little handwritten amendment to that proposal. Immediately below in the same letter, the desperate Flynn states, "Please proceed immediately with the sale to Mr. Crady of the Mulholland House, unless of course this deal with Damita could be made. Should I be forced to sell, I want to try to get every bit of cash that is possible upon its sale naturally." And there's another picture of Errol with a lot of luggage. And it says, after losing Mulholland Farm, Flynn lived a nomadic existence that included long stays in Majorca and Jamaica. Here he returns from Africa after the Roots of Heaven movie wraps. Daryl Zanuck's secretary, Maggie Shipley, predictably succumbs to the Flynn charm. So who wants to guess that that is all he owns in the world right then at that moment in time, right? How sad is that? I mean, that's all I say lately, reading about everything he's been going through. How sad, how tragic. But really, I mean, it is. Let's see. So Errol's amendment, his handwritten amendment to the proposal to Lili continues. And it says, "There is easily $150,000 invested in cash in the Mulholland property. Irregardless of what it might bring on the market, I would like to get the most cash possible and the sale made as soon as possible. Again, this is in the event the settlement cannot be reached with Lili. Please advise me of the results immediately," end quote. The Crady deal falls through, the long-distance strategizing fails, and Tiger Lil gains her revenge. She claims ownership of a house that was never meant for her, a house she does not want, by paying $50,000 in liens late in 1955. Ooh, that had to sting because, I mean, he technically was building that house when he was still with her, but he never really wanted Lili in that house with him at all. In all the houses that they had lived in together up to that point, all they did was fight like literal cats and dogs. I mean, literal cats and dogs. She once took a fully unopened full bottle of champagne and broke it over his head at a party that he arrived late for, an anniversary party. And she was so ticked off. And she did it in front of probably 30 or 40 people. So she was a little cray. I mean, I'm not saying that, he didn't deserve a lot of what he got, but yeah, like she was particularly vengeful, that one. Flynn is down and out in Europe, but over the next couple of years claws his way back to solvency. It is another period of upheaval. He buys real estate in Jamaica and his third marriage crumbles. He takes meager jobs into 1957 when Darryl F. Zanuck casts him in a couple of films that lead Flynn back to the U.S. He takes up residence in a bungalow at the Garden of Allah on Sunset Boulevard, a couple of miles from the farm, and returns to Warner Brothers for the first time in almost 6 years to portray his hero John Barrymore in the biopic Too Much Too Soon. His appearance is so shocking that few recognize him. So yes, his friend John Barrymore, back from what? Episode 5 now? 5 or 6? I forget. You got to go back and take a look. But he had a long and torrid history with John Barrymore, one of the original Hollywood movie stars. He was called The Profile. And so when he finally comes back, he's old, meaning Errol. He's old, he's aged, he's bloated, he's drunk most of the time, but he's starring in a film where he's playing his old drinking buddy, John Barrymore. And John Barrymore died of alcoholism and hard partying, like almost rivaling or maybe even worse than the type of, stuff that Errol would do. And you think that something would ring in his head, buy himself a clue that, you're not on the right path. You're following John Barrymore's pathetic example. What are you doing? And ironically, that was one of the most critically acclaimed performances of Errol's career, was when he played John Barrymore in Too Much Too Soon. And, he's quoted as saying that, I didn't even have to act. I mean, this is just who I was, half drunk all the time. This was just, I was playing myself, essentially. So yeah, it said, his appearance is so shocking that few recognize him. On the soundstage, a long, shapely pair of legs catches his eye. Looking higher, Flynn sees a blonde chorus girl who is a self-described early bloomer of 15. The 48-year-old can't resist Beverly Adland, and they become constant companions in what will be the punctuation mark on a lifetime of inappropriate relationships. To go along with his conquest of an underage girl, Flynn manages one last adventure, chasing Fidel Castro around the jagged peaks of Cuba during the revolution that brings not liberation, but communism to the island nation in 1959. I mean, that is a disgustingly inappropriate age discrepancy there. 15 and 48. The man was on such a downward spiral. He learned absolutely nothing from that trial. Absolutely nothing. And I really do think, like I've said in previous episodes, it was like he got so far down into the muck, he couldn't himself even believe how much he had lowered himself. And to take up with a young girl like that, and just, they, by all accounts, they were constant companions until his death. It's just crazy. So he spent the last 2 years of his life with this little teenage girl. Beverly Adland was her name. It says, on location making his last movie, Cuban Rebel Girls, he tells a writer, I've been beating death for years with the drink and the dames and the laughter and my way of living. Flynn has truly lived, from exploring hostile lands to rollicking through wars, making love to the most beautiful women in the world, gambling, flying planes, writing books, and sailing the seas. The least of Flynn may have been the movie star, and the most may have been the guy who domesticated himself enough to build a bachelor's paradise in an unforgiving land, a place he knew, as she went up, must be temporary because Flynn subscribes to the idea that all things in life are temporary, or as Patton had phrased it, all glory is fleeting. While living with the energetic Beverly Adland and observing the conquest of Cuba, Flynn begins his last creative enterprise. He accepts an advance from G.P. Putnam Sons and sits down to write his autobiography and gets nowhere fast. He tells columnist Art Buchwald, I can't write about myself because I lie to myself. I don't even know they're lies because I believe them. In a state of inebriated self-reflection, Flynn speaks to Patrice Winemore. She claims she needs a career to reclaim her identity, whatever that means. The conclusion I can draw from this is that I make a good friend, but a lousy husband. He is now estranged from all 3 of his wives. Even though he doesn't believe in ghostwriters, Flynn hires a novelist, Californian Earl Conrad, and that's Earl, E-A-R-L, to write for him in creative sessions that run many months in Flynn's sanctuary of Port Antonio, Jamaica. The stories pour forth of ambition, greed, cruelty, money, booze, women, affection for his circle of cronies, anger at Mother, and a fierce dedication to and grand disinterest in acting. Through it all, the process brings to the surface vivid and romantic memories of his lost love, Mulholland Farm. And there is a picture in the chapter of Beverly Adland, and it says, Flynn's last love will be the beautiful but underage Beverly Adland, whose shapely legs attract Flynn on the set of Too Much Too Soon. Here, to make ends meet, she poses nude for a men's magazine after Flynn's death. And there's these little sidebars always in the chapters that are very interesting. And the first one shows pictures, and it says Errol Flynn, father. 3 of Mulholland's most frequent visitors were Flynn's children, Sean, son of Lili Damita, born May 12, 1941, and Deidre and Rory, daughters by Nora Eddington, born January 10, 1945, and March 13, 1947. Whereas Flynn acknowledged being a lousy husband, he proved to be a diligent father when possible, given his busy shooting schedule and extensive travel for business and pleasure. Errol started palling around with Sean when the boy was about 8 and took him to the studio, to events, and to adventuring on the Zaka, that's Errol's yacht. Flynn also grew close to both Deidre, who he called Sam, and Rory, and the 2 or 3 kids would stay at Mulholland for a week at a time. When Flynn married Pat Winemore, he made it a prerequisite that she accept all his kids, despite continuing tensions with their mothers. Flynn's ongoing money troubles forced him to live overseas, and the separation from all 3 children, particularly the girls, caused him heartache. He worried over them, called on the phone, sent a steady stream of letters and postcards, and begged Nora to send them over for time periods ranging from a week to a few months at a time. On Christmas Day 1953, Patrice gave birth to the 4th and final Flynn child, daughter Arnella, and the 3 remained a family unit for the 2 most difficult emotional and financial years of Flynn's life. To her credit, Pat also helped to raise Sean and acted with him on screen in The Strange Auction, a half-hour episode of the syndicated television series The Errol Flynn Theater, which also marked Errol's only screen appearance with Sean. By that time, Errol and Pat had already agreed to separate. By all accounts, too, what I'm reading about Pat was Errol said that of all of his wives, she was the one who most was just really, really committed to giving him domestic bliss. Like, she really, really tried. She was very gracious to his children by his other wives, but you know, he could just not get it together and just settle down. And he even says it was to my detriment that I couldn't just let Pat take care of me. Patricia Winemore, the last wife, I couldn't let her take care of me, and I just couldn't settle down and just do what was right. He was just too all over the place. He was just way beyond control and salvation by that point. So the section continues and it says, Flynn's return to the United States in 1956 allowed a happy reunion with his 3 older children, tempered by ongoing issues, his debauched health, his association with Beverly Adland, who was only a few years older than Deidre, and the lack of any sense of a home in Hollywood because by then Mulholland Farm had been lost to Lili. And I've often wondered how much pleasure Lili did take in basically seizing Mulholland Farm from that lien and taking that from Errol. I mean, I guess that was just, you know, the cherry on the sundae of her vengeance again. Yeah. Life after Errol Flynn proved most difficult for the first and last of his children. Sean became an actor and adventurer who ended up as a combat photographer in Vietnam. In his book, 2 of the Missing, Sean's friend, Perry Young, said, Flynn would always warn us, as a reason for staying in Vietnam, that you couldn't go on a combat assault in New York City. He meant there was no thrill back in the world to compare with what we felt every time we got into a helicopter to be dropped into combat. This genetic disquiet, fearlessness, and thirst for adventure would soon cost Sean his life. He was captured by the Viet Cong in 1970 and executed in captivity. Lili Damita Loomis, who remarried in 1962, 3 years after the passing of her ex-husband, spent years trying to find Sean and died in 1994, refusing to believe that he had been murdered. Arnella, that was the last child that he had with Patrice Winemore. Arnella became a fashion model and lived a life not unlike that of Gia Karanji, portrayed on screen by Angelina Jolie in the biopic Gia. And that's a really good movie. It came out in, I want to say, the mid or late 90s. Gia Karanji was the famous fashion model that died of AIDS in the 80s. It's a very sad, portrait of humanity, but she does a really, really good acting job. And this was before Angelina became Angelina and became the huge star that she, well, I don't know how big of a star she is now. I mean, I guess she's still pretty big, but this was before she really hit fame and before the Brad Pitt stuff and all that. Early success in front of the camera brought with it fast living and, in short order, cocaine addiction. Arnella ended up in Jamaica, living on or near the Flynn estate, and died there of a cocaine overdose in 1998. Deirdre has spent her life in and around the movie business and contributed to a number of historical works about her father. Rory has been active in keeping Errol Flynn's memory alive through the website inlikeflynn.com and in the 2007 personal remembrance of her famous father and the home she shared with him, the title of her book, The Baron of Mulholland. Well, she definitely, Rory, shows that she has a little bit of a sense of humor by titling her website that she has In Like Flynn, right? And the chapter shows some really, really cute pictures of Errol with his children. And it says, in 1952, his last year at Mulholland Farm, Errol plays with children, Sean, age 11, Rory, 5, and Deirdre, 7. They are walking on the small plateau above the lower pasture with a tennis court behind them. And then there's a cute picture of Errol with a 3-year-old Rory. There are 3 of them. And it says, contrasting views from the photo shoot of 3-year-old Rory with her dad in the living room beside the Ganguin in 1950. That's one of his famous framed art pieces that he had in his house. First is the look how she's grown pose, then the official portrait of a happy couple, and then an improvised shot with a relaxed and proud father and a suddenly frightened little girl who's not quite sure what's going on. And then it also shows a picture of Errol in front of the famous self-portrait, the one that his artist friend John Decker painted of him. And it says, 5 years after the death of John Decker, his moody creation, the Flynn portrait, has moved from the living room fireplace, where it hung at an angle, to flush mounting over the mantel in the den. This is one of the last Flynn photos taken at Mulholland. And there's also a picture of Errol and Patrice Winemore at a party. And it says, Errol and Patrice Flynn spent 2 years of relative happiness on Mulholland Drive that included premieres and other formal events. And then there's another picture of Errol, and the caption reads, Flynn displays a weary smile, vaguely focused eyes, and some serious bedhead as he arrives in London after seeing his family's possessions seized in Rome for unpaid wages on William Tell. That's when Bruce Cabot, his friend, sued him. He will meet with bankers there in a vain attempt to restart the production. Now we come to Errol's death. And it says, Errol Flynn will soon die in Vancouver, British Columbia, while in the process of selling his last important possession, the Zaka, in a desperate attempt to raise still more money. The post-mortem findings for this 50-year-old man include coronary thrombosis, myocardial infarction, along with coronary arteriosclerosis, fatty degeneration of the liver, cirrhosis of the liver, and diverticulitis of the colon. As Flynn's body is finally beginning to cool from the cauldron that had produced him, Flynn's women begin a post-mortem catfight. Beverly Adland, traveling with Flynn, insists that the funeral take place in Canada. Patrice Winemore, who he was technically still married to, insists that it take place in California. Winemore wins, and Buster Wiles travels to Vancouver carrying legal papers that clear Flynn's way across the border by rail in a $25 coffin. That's actually a little, I don't know, that's just kind of improper of Beverly Adland to just insist that he's buried in Canada. I mean, I get that you spent the last 2 years of his life with him, but you don't have any children with him, and you're technically not married to him, but I digress. Yeah, but in a $25 coffin. I wonder what that would equate to in today's funds. The passing of Hollywood's grandest swashbuckler sets off a flood of retrospectives in the national press, all of them wistful and affectionate, considering that this had been, at times, a nasty man often at war with reporters. Columnist Luella O. Parsons writes, quote, "There was a phase in Errol's life when he was married to Nora Eddington, when he fancied himself a country gentleman. He built a beautiful home atop of Mulholland Drive, surrounded by acres of land. I remember going there to a party and thought what a delightful, thoughtful host he was. It was the first of the lavish parties given in Hollywood, and no expense was spared." Bill Skolem writes in the New York Mirror, quote, "He had an epic home on Mulholland Drive and was inordinately proud of it. He lost it for taxes, being unable to keep up his standard of living, pay his alimony, and also pay his taxes. He described the loss of the home by saying, 'One of my wives nationalized it,'" end quote. The end of Errol Flynn is marked 100 times over that week in the same way, with a Flynn quip, a nod to Mulholland Farm, a string of colorful quotes from the ex-wives and film stars who had known him best, and toasts by hard-bitten members of the press who loved and hated the guy. All raise a glass to one who had made their jobs a lot more interesting for the quarter century just ended. Flynn remains today the sum of his parts, a charismatic man, an angry man, an artistic man, a perverted man, a beautiful man, an ugly man, a graceful and a clumsy man. Like all humans, he experienced his triumphs and his tragedies, did his good deeds, and made his share of mistakes. Legends pervade about Flynn's exploits. Most of the bad times are forgotten. His appearance and his voice remain in more than 50 motion pictures, and they go on captivating people. He is spoofed in movies like Robin Hood Men in Tights and redeemed in My Favorite Year. Sales of his DVDs soar, and books like this one continue to be written. And even with the passage of time, his grand mountaintop home, Mulholland Farm, remains a vivid memory, unforgettable, and an endless source of conversation to those who passed through its gates and explored the place to glimpse Errol Flynn's idea of heaven. And there's a picture of Errol here in the chapter, and it says, "Back in the United States in 1959, Flynn's once handsome face reveals a lifetime of physical and emotional pain as he stands with his daughters. Rory remembers greeting him at the airport. As he stepped off the plane, she says, 'I was shocked. Suddenly, sadness came over me. This was Dad? My dad? He looked ancient.'" And he really does, doesn't he? He looks just world weary at that point. I wonder, I mean, it says it was taken in 1959, but I wonder how many more weeks or months he had to live at that point. Okay, so now we're coming to the part in the chapter where it's talking about the last hurrah party that Errol had at Mulholland House on the farm. So there's that section, and then there's one right before, and it's called Errol Flynn Innkeeper. And it says, in a magazine article, Flynn's friend Sarah Hamilton said of Errol and his home, entirely free of the social bounds that encompass the lives and activities of big stars, he invites whom he pleases. It may be an actor out of work, or odd and sundry characters he may only know slightly. This description fits young Ivan Hayes, a British subject who has set out for America at the end of the war, landed in Canada, and worked odd jobs in support of one goal, to be a star in Hollywood. Hayes made his way to California and, late in 1949, found himself a passenger in a car driven by his girlfriend Gloria on his way up Mulholland Drive to a party at Errol Flynn's house. "I remember standing there," said Hayes, "looking at the faces of the people that were there. I saw Ida Lupito, Bruce Cabot was there. I believe Big Boy Williams was there. Steve Cochran, Lawrence Tierney. Flynn knew Gloria. You can't date Errol and not go to bed with him. They were very, very friendly. He called her baby. He gave her a hug, and there was a definite rapport. The host was gracious with the newcomer. Flynn treated me nicely. He was very interested when he talked to someone, learning about what they were and who they were." From Hayes, Flynn heard a familiar story of a good-looking young guy who had knocked about, traveled the world and taking odd jobs, and he ended up in Hollywood. For the next few months, Hayes shuttled between Los Angeles and Toronto. He met up with Flynn again soon after the star completed his studio interiors for Kim. Hayes reported that he was trying to find a sponsor so he could remain in the States. Flynn not only offered to sponsor Ivan, but invited him to stay at Mulholland. Hayes lived at Mulholland Farm for almost a month, lodging in the aqua bedroom that had once been occupied by John Barrymore and by Buster Wiles. Hayes had an insider's view of Flynn within the confines of his home, and noted that he was a terrible grump in the mornings and ate kippers for breakfast. Flynn entertained many women, but wouldn't let them sleep over. Ivan heard cabs pull up in the night to take the women away. Flynn the drunk could turn nasty in a hurry, said Hayes, and his pal, Bruce Cabot, was a good deal worse. The same Bruce Cabot that sued Errol when he was in one of the lowest points of his life, remember? He was a prick, said Hayes, who related a story about a Flynn going-away party thrown at Mulholland in May 1950, before Errol was about to leave for location work in New Mexico on his new film, Rocky Mountain. At one point, Flynn and his cronies headed down to the casino. Gloria and Steve Cochran and I were talking by the pool, said Hayes, and Cabot said, "Come on, Errol's going to stage a cockfight." I said, "You go on, I'm going to pass." He said, "What's the matter, pretty boy? You can't stand the sight of blood." And I decked him. I went upstairs and thought, well, you just ruined everything. You struck one of Errol's closest chums. I started packing my clothes. Flynn came up to my room and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm leaving." He was surprised. He said, "Over a fight?" I told him, well, I had just hit one of his best friends. Errol said, "Who can be an asshole when he's had a few drinks?" "Ivan," he said, "for Christ's sake, don't worry about it. If you want to leave, leave, but don't leave because of that." Within 10 days, Errol was gone to New Mexico to make Rocky Mountain. He took Princess Irene on location with him. They checked into the El Rancho Hotel, and here Flynn suddenly decided that his new 23-year-old leading lady, blonde, violet-eyed, soft-spoken Patrice Wymore, would be an interesting conquest. Hayes followed Flynn to New Mexico, trying to get his immigration problem resolved. Instead, it was Flynn who asked for help from Hayes. What he wanted to do, said Hayes, was take Irene off his hands because he'd fallen in love with Patrice Wymore. He said, "Stay over and get a room. I'll pay for it. Watch the movie and keep Irene occupied." She was a princess, and they were engaged, and Irene was absolutely beside herself because he had gotten a crush on Patrice. I never understood that. Patrice was very tall, and in person, she's kind of plain. I couldn't understand. Irene was 19, 20, a gorgeous brunette who adored him, but he just couldn't keep still. I think with Errol, it's the chase. He always enjoyed the chase. Hayes knew it was hopeless to have Flynn as his sponsor and left Gallup after one night. He would not see his friend again for 7 years. When he did, it was a very sad, sad time. He just looked dreadful. I used to go over to the Garden of the Law where he was staying, but I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd remembered him as he was. Ivan changed his name to Steve and went on to land minor parts in movies like Titanic, Time After Time. Hayes also managed the famous coffee shop Googie's on Sunset Boulevard and recounted his experiences with Flynn and others in the 2008 book Googie's, Coffee Shop to the Stars. And there's a picture of Errol and Bruce Cabot, and it says Bruce Cabot and Flynn in happier times in 1940 when they were the young studs of Hollywood, years before aspiring actor Ivan Hayes decked Cabot for being a prick at a Mulholland party. And then the last section of the book is talking about Mulholland's last hurrah, the White Mice Party. Mice as in M-I-C-E, okay? Only 3 days after Luella Parson broke the news that Nora would seek a divorce from Errol, Flynn threw his last, and some say, best Hollywood party. So 3 days after you're told that your wife wants to divorce you. Let's throw a party. How very Errol. He did it during the production of That Forsyte Woman, dubbing it his coming out party in the wake of Nora's decision to leave, and invited everyone who was anyone in Hollywood. Just like Errol. George Jessel, the Toastmaster General, held court along with Flynn and Marge Eddington for attendees that included aging Hollywood royalty Gloria Swanson and Ronald and Bonita Coleman, and the younger set led by Kathy Downs, Susan Peters, and Shirley Temple and John Agar. Flynn's current leading lady, Greer Garson, was instrumental in enticing many MGM personalities to attend, including Clark Gable, Van Johnson, Robert Young, Walter Pidgeon, and Eddie Mannix, along with such other A-list names as James Stewart, Dorothy Lamour, Ann Miller, John Fontaine, Jennifer Jones, and David O. Selznick, Loretta Young, Jane Wyman, Jane Wyman was Ronald Reagan's first wife. For comic relief, there was Jack Benny and Mary Livingstone, Judy Canova, and the Ritz brothers. Flynn's cronies were on hand as well, led by Bruce Cabot, Alan Hale, Raoul Walsh, and attorney Robert Ford. The LA Examiner said, "The view from his Mulholland Drive home is breathtaking. The valley lights resemble gleaming precious stones thrown on a black velvet cloth." Flynn ordered a bank of lights to be directed on the pool, and a marquee was erected over it. Huge water lilies floated on the surface, and an endless stream of bubbles waved by. Guests dined on silver plates in a huge poolside tent erected for the event. The tent was large enough for a fully stocked bar and formal tables with catering by Romanoffs that included brilliantly plumbed pheasants strutting their stuff on the white linens. A rumba band played steadily for dancing. And there's a picture here, and it shows Errol with a bunch of ladies, and it says, "Flynn gets chummy with starlet Donna Drake as writer Cobina Wright and a happy Shirley Temple look on. All study Smoky Flynn's green sheet for the white mice races. Later in the evening, Flynn would make a pass at Temple in the steam room." And of course, there were the white mice races, for which Flynn wrote an elaborate and false historical retrospective and created names for 40 racing mice. So I guess it was like a program where he named all these mice and like just made this little like historical story to, made up story to go with it. On the seamier side, Flynn was feeling none too kind toward Lolly Parsons for dishing about his pending divorce, so he hired a San Francisco transvestite to impersonate Parsons and made sure she was as offensive as possible in dishing secrets among the guests. After midnight, Shirley Temple and John Agar searched for Flynn to say goodbye, and they found him in the steam room drunk. "Come on in, Shirley," Errol called, looking about for Agar. "Just you." She declined. "Through the haze, I could see his inviting expression turned scornful," said Temple. Flynn mumbled an insult, and Temple noted the incordious end of her grand evening. "Goodbye, kid," he said, and waved me away with a sweeping gesture. The party lasted until 5 a.m., and several newspapers and magazines sent reporters and photographers. Photos taken after midnight show a hammered but contented Errol Flynn. And then now that Errol has passed and the glory days of his beloved Mulholland house, situated on Mulholland Farm, are coming to an end, we now are going into the next family that moved in to take occupancy of Mulholland House and Farm. And this is the family, their surname is the Hamlins. And there's a picture of Stuart Hamlin, and it says, "A new regime takes over at Mulholland Farm. Musician and radio star Stuart Hamlin poses under the two-way mirror in Flynn's downstairs bedroom, which now serves as the music room and recording studio." So Stuart Hamlin was a very famous cowboy type folk singer. He was famously friends with stars like John Wayne and Ronald Reagan. He moves his family in, and now we're going to get into the Hamlin era of the farm. And by all accounts, there are some grumblings from Errol. It seems like Errol never really left the property, and we're going to find out all about his presence at the farm while the Hamlins are there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter, Tiger Lil's Revenge. And the next chapter is going to be called This Old House. And I'm very interested to see what the next phase and chapter is going to be for Mulholland House at that point. I'm interested to hear about the Hamlin's stay there. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Still thinking about Errol. I'm still praying for the soul of Errol Flynn, and I hope somewhere, somehow, he found peace. Thanks so much for watching, and can't wait to see you on the next chapter. I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye.
Wasn't I a nasty character? Wasn't I horrible? Oh, well. Goodbye now.